An NBC News special report. Here's Tom Brokaw in Washington.
Good evening, everyone. It is the 9th of June, the year 2004, and that is the hearse that is burying the remains of Ronald Wilson Reagan, 40th President of the United States, former Commander-in-Chief, into the heart of the nation's capital for a final tribute from the American people. The casket will be brought to 16th and Constitution, where it will be loaded onto a caisson and drawn by horses to the nation's Capitol building. It will lie in state in the rotunda after state services this evening until Friday morning, when there will be a national funeral service at the National Cathedral in Northwest Washington. And then this man from Illinois, twice governor of California, twice president of the United States, always by landslide proportions. His body will be taken from the east back to the west and burial at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, looking out toward the Pacific. All along the motorcade route, the crowds are 6 and 7 deep. There's such a crowd expected tonight in the Capitol that many of the members of Congress will have to see the proceedings in a room with a television set. The rotunda will remain open throughout the night for the thousands of people who are expected to pass by. In California, more than 100,000 came to pay their final respects. I'm joined by NBC's Tim Russert, who's our Washington bureau chief and moderator of Meet the Press, and a very special guest off to our left, former Senator Bob Dole, now a Senate spouse in Washington. I used to remember coming to California when Ronald Reagan was the governor and he was the Republican national chairman.
It's been a while.
When you saw him in the governor's chair in California, a lot of people in this part of the country still did not take him seriously.
Oh, that's true. I mean, I think, you know, well, he'd been referred to as not knowing what was going on. You didn't understand it, didn't know a thing when he got into the governor's office. But he demonstrated even there that he knew what was going on. And he had a great success as governor, and then still a lot of people didn't take him. You read the letters that President Reagan wrote during his presidency and all the other things that he did, I think everyone understands that he was a pretty bright guy.
His daughter Patty told me that he was an intellectually curious man, but he was not a complicated man, and people confused that with his intellectual curiosity. This is the Old Guard unit from Fort Myers, just across the river in Virginia. They've been preparing for this occasion all week long. The horse-drawn caisson and a riderless horse dressed for the occasion, what they call a caparison horse, a tradition that goes back to the ancient battlefields of Mongolia and beyond. When great warriors were struck down, their horses were brought back with just the boots and the stirrup.
And the boots are his.
These are his riding boots. He loved the old cavalry riding boots, and they've gotten these from the museum, and they'll put those into the stirrups for the ride to the Capitol. We've not had this kind of a state funeral with as much ceremony, of course, since the memorable time and the shocking time, really, of the death of John F. Kennedy. Even though Ronald Reagan has been really gravely ill for 10 years, so many people find it stunning that he is gone from the American scene.
I think even in death, though, Ronald Reagan was underestimated. I mean, thousands and thousands of people are lining the streets.
Tim, we have been talking about that, about how he touched the chord of America, touched the nerve of America, as very few politicians in our lifetime have, across party lines, across regions of the country. When you think about the proportion of his victory, always by a landslide in California, a Democratic state, and then he swept the nation in 1980 and swept it again in 1984, even though he put the country through a very difficult recession and there were difficult questions about what was going on abroad as well. But the moral clarity of the man and his ability to convey his authentic views was unparalleled during his time.
Tom, people who disagree with him politically liked him and respected him. He had a way of connecting with people.
And you cannot overstate the importance of the role of that woman in his life or in his political career, Nancy Reagan.
His life was her life.
Truly was. People often question, just as they question his ability to do the job,
Right.
the strength of their marriage. There should be no question about that now. These past several years have been a trial for her, but she never, ever characterized it in that way and never complained and kept him at home. It occurs to me that what we're missing on this occasion is Ronald Reagan to sum it all up for us. When there was a time of national mourning, when there's a great tragedy in America, or for that matter, a great celebration of some triumph, no one could find the words as effectively as Ronald Reagan could.
Well, knowing President Reagan, he'd probably start off with a joke of some kind. I mean, even today. I mean, he'd think of something that would make people feel good.
We were also worried about his assassination attempt. Honey, I forgot the duck.
Yeah.
Right. Looking up at the surgeons when he was on the operating table and saying, I hope you're all Republicans. And they ruined my best suit.
Yeah. Yeah, that was Ronald Reagan.
As President and as Commander-in-Chief, Ronald Reagan had a special place in the hearts of the American military. He built up American military forces. His critics said too much. He got the military pay raise as well. And he was always at ease when he was in a military setting. It was palpable, the pride that he took in America's armed forces.
He never heard a shot fired, but he was a captain.
That's right.
He's very proud of it, too.
Somebody has described him this week as the flag bearer for your generation of World War II veterans, as the guy who was out in front of the parade, in a matter of speaking, even though he stayed stateside during the war.
This is where they're going to put the casket on the
Caisson.
16th and 1600 Constitution.
In the shadow of the White House.
Tim, how many times did you interview President Reagan?
I was with Tom the last day he was in the White House.
Right.
Yeah, it was an amazing day. Tom, he took you out to the Rose Garden and said?
He took me to the Rose Garden, and because I began covering his campaign in 1966, he said I wanted to have our picture taken because you were there at the beginning. And then he looked at me with that twinkle that he always had, and he said, it worked out pretty well for both of us. I don't know a reporter who ever really laid a glove on him. Most of my colleagues who are my generation talk about interviewing him and thinking that we were loaded for bear. We'd go in there, and he'd be flicking us off his sleeve.
Tom, you know, it's interesting, the parallel to 1963, as you mentioned, it was such a day of tragedy with President Kennedy. This crowd is much more celebratory, and it's honoring a life.
I think when Kennedy, it was a shock. I mean, America was stunned. I mean, we didn't know what to do.
Yeah, we were reeling, frankly. And we had not seen this on television in our lifetime. No. This was a new ceremony, and it was shared by the country simultaneously.
Well, there you see the back of the White House, and I guess that's where it all begins, right there.
All of his friends and family members who were there with him said he just loved being president. Loved coming into the Oval Office every morning. Loved the dinners.
With a coat and tie.
With a coat and tie.
No shirt sleeves. No.
On that day of Tom's last interview, Senator, as we were breaking down the cameras, I said, Mr. President, is there anything that you brought to this office that you think is uniquely yours? And he paused. He said, I believe I'm the only man who ever sat in this Oval Office who knows what he looks like photographed from every angle. He understood how to carry himself and present himself as president.
Well, he had great help from Mike Deaver and people like that, too. Lyndon Ofsiger, those old guys.
Not unimportant to his success that when he ran for national office, those are the people who had gotten him elected in California twice.
That's right.
And they'd been around, and it was a finely tuned team. Stu Spencer.
Well, it was a very tight circle. I mean, it's hard to get in the Reagan circle. I mean, you know, I never made it, but but these were friends, have been friends for like Ed Meese 30-some years. I mean, it was way, way back.
But not all conservative ideologues. I mean, Stu Spencer and others were very pragmatic politicians.
Alan Simpson is watching all of this with us as well. He was a great friend of President Reagan's, and they shared not only a love of...
He was an equal opportunity joke lover and a magnificent human being, and I was privileged to know him in that way. Very, very privileged indeed.
Well, some of that stuff of yours is about 50 years old, those jokes that Simpson tells.
I know, but he was over 50, so he loved to. Well, Bob Dole, let me tell you, being and to you, Tom, Bob Dole was as loyal to him as you can imagine. Maybe Bob wasn't in the inner circle, as he says, but let me tell you, Bob Dole supported him and supported George Bush like no other senator. When it was the president, when you were there and you were the leader and you supported the president, didn't matter, and that's the way it worked. And it was a lot of fun, and there were other times that I'll share as the evening goes on that were
at it. The horse that...
This horse is 12 years old, I understand.
That's right.
Yeah. Sergeant York.
Franklin Roosevelt, but he's hovering in that second category with a lot of range to maybe move into that realm in the future.
This for just a moment. Absorb the majesty of it all. NBC's Chip Reed is at 16th and Constitution, and Chip, Tim was just saying a moment ago, the difference, of course, between this and what happened in 1963 with the burial of John Kennedy is that we were in a stunned state at that time. The nation was shocked into deep grief. Now, the emotions are running high, obviously, but the people are there to salute someone that they consider to be their friend, and they're applauding.
Absolutely, Tom. People are here to celebrate a life, as someone there said earlier. It is, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a festive mood, but people here feel proud. There are people here who came from the West Coast just for this. There are people here who drove all through the night. There are people here wearing campaign buttons and carrying that they had back in 1980 and all the way back to 1968, in fact, when Ronald Reagan first thought about giving a run for the president a try. I mean, these people are, in most cases, hardcore Reagan supporters and have been for many, many years. But I got to tell you, there are a lot of other people here who are just tourists, who just happen to be here at this time and also have been very touched and moved by this situation. I mean, this is a politician who has gone across party lines, and it's always, of course, years afterwards when many of the much of the partisan hue and cry has passed. You don't have the kind of political tensions, but we're seeing people of all political stripes here honoring this man and treating him as a national hero.
It's almost like a parade. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, people are applauding and probably crying at the same time. I mean, it's...
I know of very few politicians who ran for such high office as many times as he did. And his opponents really carry no rancor or bitterness toward him.
Oh, Vice President Mondale, who ran against President Reagan, was quoted, I read the day of peace, that what a great guy Reagan was, and he knew he was defeated in the second debate when Reagan said, "I won't make age an issue."
Right.
You know, I knew it was over. The campaign was over.
Youth and inexperience.
And Ronald Reagan hired James Baker,
right,
his opponent, George Bush's campaign manager, to be his White House chief of staff. You know, Tom, I was talking to a member of the greatest generation, as you have so aptly labeled Senator Dole's generation, and one of them said, you know, the importance about Ronald Reagan is that he also died with dignity. He leveled with us about Alzheimer's, and for 10 years, he was very courageous in dealing with that affliction, and that means an awful lot to people. And I think we're seeing some of that built-up emotion today in this salute to Ronald Reagan.
I think they're more than 7 deep. You see now, Tom, they're really maybe 8, 10, 12 deep in some places. And
Bob Dole, we have in Texas with us James Addison Baker, who was the White House Chief of Staff and later was Secretary of the Treasury and, of course, Secretary of State. The administration of his friend George Bush the 41st. He'll be coming to Washington with his friend, the former president, for the services on Friday. Mr. Baker, you and I have talked about this in the past.
We all know that. He was a big picture president, but he was...
Alan Greenspan, saving Social Security, raising the payroll tax.
And Tip O'Neill.
How did Ronald Reagan react to the notion of having to increase taxes in order to deal with the deficit or to deal with Social Security?
Well, you know, after the big tax cut in 81, we had a couple of corrections in 82 and 83 because there were some big, big loopholes in the 81 tax bill that gave...
Together, I think that was a hallmark of Ronald Reagan's political career. Disagree with him, but it was never a disagreeable patient.
I see my whole life passing before me because in 1980 at the convention in Detroit.
He was a great president, as has been said earlier today on this.
Alan Simpson, did any of your Democratic friends come to you in utter frustration that they just could not get around Ronald Reagan when he was the president, whatever the issue? I know that Tip O'Neill had a great relationship with him, but at the same time he'd grow so... I talked to her yesterday some, and she was just so gratified by the crowds that turned out in California, and I know how much this will mean to her today, but what was really more important to her was that the children had come home. It's not been easy in the relationship, social unrest and so on, didn't he?
Yes, he did. I mean, it's ironic because he was a Democrat for decades, all the way into the early 1960s. He loved Frank.
And the one thing about the Reagan people that we learned from the presidency was the deep understanding of and use of symbols. And clearly, this week is an effort not only to celebrate
the country.
Very historic ceremony. It's a tribute to President Reagan that he's being honored and elevated to the situation like he is.
Well, Mr. President, we thank you so much for being with us from Colorado, and we send all of our very best regards as well to Mrs. Ford.
We will see you in Washington, I guess, tomorrow.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Mr. President. As we continue our coverage here now, we want to show side by side, as it were, the contrasting times and the contrasting climate in America. On your right, obviously, is the procession of carrying the body of Ronald Reagan to the Capitol. And on your left, in black and white, a nation stunned, its young, vital president, John Kennedy, shot down in Dallas, Texas, returning to the nation's capital and on television for the first time in this nation. 21 F-15s at 1,000 feet over the nation's capital. Have a base in North Carolina. And there, the missing man formation. A tribute to the loss of a commander-in-chief. I hope I got that right. I was told they were going to be F-15s. I'm not sure that they were.
I think so. They're on 4th Street now, right?
I think they are. Yes, they're at 4th Street. And Rahima Ellis is there for us, I think. Rahima, can you hear me?
Tom, I can hear you.
Tell me about the mood of the crowd.
The crowd, it was a silence in this crowd just before the caisson carrying the coffin of Ronald Reagan proceeded at a very slow pace, about 3 miles an hour. And then you could hear applause. It was moving up the road as the caisson moved eastward on Constitution Avenue. And then as it passed several groups of people, there are about 15 people deep here, according to the District of Columbia Police. All the cameras went up in the air, and you could hear a click, 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 click all the way through this crowd. People have said to me, we talked to them, they said there is a feeling of intense power as they stand here and witness this. It is a grueling day here in Washington, D.C., Tom. It's been about 90 degrees with the heat index. It feels like it's 100 degrees, but people have been lining up along this